Okay. All right, we're live. Welcome to episode 42, The Answer. I am your host, Chad, Cheddar Caveman, on this channel and all of the other things that are on the internet, probably. So for the first time in a little while, we're a little light on the news, actually. We're sort of waiting for Theme Forces to drop sometime this month. We're waiting. Eilish will be coming out in the no quarter this month, a little later. CID is wrapping up, so we're not going to really see the fruits of that for a few months. We did see the models go on the release schedule. No surprise for December. I expect many or most will be at War Machine Weekend as well. Or at least that would not surprise me terribly. Yeah, so that's the stuff. There's no real big news as far as Privateer Press is concerned. I, however, do have a little bit of news. So next week's episode, and I'll cover this at the end again, but on next week's episode, I'm going to be airing at a special time, 5 o'clock Central Daylight Time for now. Central Daylight, 5 o'clock, and we will have our first guest on the show, assuming I get all my technical stuff worked out. And that first guest will be none other than Mr. Will Pagani from Privateer Press and many Circle Tournament fame from Mark II. That should be really exciting. We'll have him to talk about some things. Probably talking a little bit about the CID that just happened and Circle in general. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'll remind everybody at the end of the episode. I'll post some stuff about it, but subscribe now if you want to make sure you catch that, since it will be at a little bit of a different time. And then today, I think what we're going to do is get back kind of to our roots. So apologies, I still haven't gotten my green screen worked out. I don't mind this. The echo is hopefully not terrible. Is that just a smidge? Nope. All right. And but we're going to get back to our roots, and we're going to discuss some models and units. And when I posted that I was going to be doing this the show today, I asked people what they want to talk about. And I didn't really get a lot of responses, but one person did say, "Oh, you should talk about Secret Masters." And the thing about that is I did talk about Secret Masters back, I think it was episode 39. So if you want more detailed information, and so just in case you didn't see that, Secret Masters is a theme that will be coming with the September drop that was in one of Privateer Press's insiders a few weeks back, where Will Pagani talks about a Morvana 1 list that he built in that theme that he really liked, and we sort of expounded on that. Talked about it quite a bit, actually. However, what I thought I would do is we do have a few more Circle models that I haven't covered. I think I looked at my list and there was like 5 or 6. But what I think I'm going to cover today are some possible things that you some of the minion options you might play. You might consider in that and talk about what they do and what their strengths are and what utility they could bring you. And I just want to hit on a couple. There were episodes where I talked about a few of them that are viable, so I'm not going to hit on those again. There's previous episodes, and I'm going to try to work on. I know this was a request a little while back. I'm going to try to work on maybe using my blog to put up a list of like which episode has which. Like what I discussed, basically, and that way people can go back, because there's quite a few of them now, and it's sort of tough when you're like, oh, I want to watch an episode, like what's in it. And I've been trying to update the descriptions on YouTube as well, so if you go in there, you can kind of search through. You should be able to find it, but yeah. So anyways, some of the things that I've covered before I think are great potential inclusions with Secret Masters. Those would include, I think, Hutchuk. He brings us an armor debuff that is not tied to a caster, so there's a lot of lists where they may struggle into something like War Machine without bringing without bringing that additional low rust bomb. And he's a pretty solid model to have. If he can't do that, he has ambush. He's a solo. Like there's things that he can do. So I think he's one that you would consider. We talked about him a while back. I think the Totem Hunter again could be. He's more of a heavy hitter. He's a little bit specialized, but I think he's really good if you can learn how to play him. His prey breaks him hit actually very, very hard, especially if you can combine that with any other debuff, which a few Circle Warlocks can bring. And he also has sprint and just a lot of utility. So I think he's one you would consider. I talked about. Lanissa Rissel is not one, so I'm going to talk a little more generically about her. She's not a solo I would really consider in Secret Masters because you can bring Black-clad Wayfarers, which I think are strictly superior pretty much all the time to her, the exception being like against Legion. However, in Devourer's Host and I just blanked on it. The Wild Hunt, the Wolfsworn theme. Those two don't allow Black-clad Wayfarers, and so if they are changed, and we don't know yet that they will be, if they are changed to allow for a minion solo to be included, I think she's something to consider because that puts Hunter's Mark back in as an option to those lists, and I think that would be really a great inclusion in many of those. I've certainly played a few recently where I was like, well, Alanissa goes in this for sure. I talked about Alton Ashley in an episode. I think at 6 points he's a little pricey personally, but if you really do want some ranged Grievous Wounds, he's still your best bet. And he brings the range 14 power 12 gun, which is just not something Circle has a lot of. So you can certainly make use of that in a lot of lists. Swamp Gutters. I talked about them a few episodes back. I mean, this sort of seems like an odd thing to use your like one slot for a solo for, but I think in the right lists it'll absolutely be strong. Again, I'm not necessarily so sure I would always do it with Secret Masters, but I think some of the other themes I would be looking at it. Tanith in particular, Wormwood possibly as well, but Tanith in particular strikes me as somebody who would want. You may spend your unit slot on Swamp Gutters. And of course, we're not going to talk about Eilish is coming out. He plays for all the factions, and seems like he's going to have some upkeep removal. So we'll talk about him more when we get his final rules, but I would say he's certainly a possible inclusion. But let's talk about some new things. So I'm going to kind of go through just a few of them. We may hit on these a little quicker than usual, but I want to try to focus on what they can do. So what I want to talk about is the Pharaoh Bone Grinders. So they are speed 5, mat 6, rat 4, defense 12, armor 14. They have combined melee, tough. They're small base models. They have a POW 10 half-inch melee cleaver, and they come as 4 models for 5 points or 6 models for 8 points. They, in addition to playing Circle, play for Legion, Scorn, and Trollbloods. On their melee weapon, they can choose between 2 attack types. One is Grievous Wounds, which we've talked about in abundance. It removes tough and healing. Or Inflict Pain, which is when they hit a War Beast with the weapon, the model can place a Fury Point on or remove the Fury Point from. They have Dismember, which makes them weapon masters against War Beasts, basically. And Craft Talisman, which is target friendly Warlock within 3 inches of a model in this unit that is target a friendly Warlock within 3 inches of a model in this unit that is in formation. If the Warlock is in range, when it casts a spell and is the point of origin, it gains +2 range. Spells with the range of Self, Spray, or Control are not affected, and Craft Talisman lasts for 1 turn. So why would you include the Pharaoh Bone Grinders? Well, 1, they're cheap. 5 points for a minion unit, 8 points for a full unit is very cheap. So if we're talking about Secret Masters, that's going to give you access to some very cheap shield guards. And they have tough, so you may even get multiple uses out of them. So that's going to give you, let's say you took the full unit at 8 points, that might give you sort of 8 shield guards mathematically, right? If you have 6 models in the unit, you assume 2 of the 6 will tough once at least, depending on a few other factors. You may get 8 shield guards out of them. If you have anybody who picks up souls, so this is not a Secret Masters tech, but Wormwood would, if some of the other themes allow for this. Wormwood is one that may consider adding them. At 8 points, one thing to consider at 8 points for a max unit, they are not more points efficient than taking Bloodweavers, and they're less than a min unit of Wolves Warboros is actually a point less. So if you just need bodies, the full unit is not really a value. However, the one thing that I like them for, aside from being the cheap shield guards, is that they bring Craft's Talisman. And there's a few of our warlocks that really can benefit from having access to another 2 inches on their spells. Someone like Mosar, who, even though he can jump around the table using Sands of Fate, having 10 inches on Crevasse or Curse of Shadows is a big deal. And it also gives you extra range on your buff spells. So, you go from 6 inches to 8 inches to cast your buff spells. And you wouldn't think that comes up too often, but when it does, it can be pretty critical. Being able to more safely cycle your buffs around can be good. And then the fact that they double as shield guards for you is, in Secret Masters, that is really a cool bonus. And that's sort of where I focus with them. I think they're one of the best choices for several warlocks. I mentioned Mosar. I think they could be interesting there. Tanith, they seem interesting with. I think she frequently may want a little bit of extra range on her spells when she's not feeding. Kruger, telekinesis at 10 inches seems pretty good. Lightning Storm out to 10 inches seems pretty good. Gallows out to 12 inches could really catch somebody unawares. Now keep in mind these won't affect Geomancy whatsoever because it does specify a Warlock. It also means it won't affect Una 1. She is a solo technically. She just has some Warlock abilities. I suppose you could, Kaya 2 can get Dogpile out another 2 inches. It's already 12. I'm not sure that's a huge deal. And she has Laris for a little bit of extra range generally. Sort of mentally going through the list. I don't, there's some casters I don't necessarily think that you would see him with, but anyways, if you're playing Secret Masters, there's certainly one. Actually, Morvana 1 having extra range on a few of her spells can be pretty good potentially too. And you can maybe sort of put them in a spot where you are concerned that you don't want to play like a Gallows Grove because you don't think that the arcing will be relevant, but these guys will bring you that. To me, yeah, the fact they have Grievous Wounds and Webmaster against War Beasts and things like that is nice, but it's certainly not the thing that I would be focusing on whatsoever. I think you will find times where that comes up. I think you should be looking for it. Any model you include in your list, you should know what they can do so that you can use them in basically to their highest potential in any list. But I do think for these, you're including them because they're cheap for shield guards and they're going to give you Craft's Talisman and potentially souls if you have something that is picking those up. So. Yeah, so that's pretty much it on the Pharaoh Bone Grinders. So as we sort of work our way down the line here, the next one that I wanted to talk about is the Gatorman Boker and Bog Trog Swamp Shambler. So bear with me, this card has actually quite a bit of text on it. So there's two things here. There's the Boker and then there's the Shambler Grunts. So we'll start with the Boker. He's speed 5. He's Mat 6, defense 12, armor 16. He's amphibious. He is the officer, of course. He is tough. He's on a medium base. He has 2 melee weapons, both that are half-inch range. One's a bite that is power and strength 12, and the other one's a tail strike that is power and strength 10. And then the grunts are also speed 5, strength 6, mat 5, rat doesn't matter, defense 10, armor 13. They are amphibious. They have combined melee attack, undead, and they're small base models, and they have a half-inch melee attack that is power and strength 8. The Boker has 5 damage boxes, and the whole unit costs 11 points and is field allowance 2. Plays for every minion, every Horde's faction that isn't Grymkin. And then the situation here is Boker has a rule called Death Magic, and there's a lot of text, so bear with me. During its activation, this model can remove friendly grunt models in its unit that are in formation from play to make additional melee attacks or to boost attack or damage rolls. It can make 1 additional melee attack or boost 1 roll for each model removed. When this model would suffer damage, you can choose 1 or more models in this unit that are in formation to suffer any number of those damage points instead, divided as you choose. If you do, this model does not suffer that damage. A model cannot suffer more damage as a result of Death Magic than it has unmarked boxes. He has a magic ability called Hand of Glory, which is range command on his command 7. I don't know if I mentioned that. That magic ability is 6. And if he hits a model with it, they become stationary. And then he has Stir the Dead, which is when a living model is destroyed in the Boker's command range, this model gains that destroyed model's corpse token. At the end of your next control phase, you remove all corpse tokens from the model and add 1 Shambler Grunt to the unit for each corpse token removed. Place the Swamp Shambler Grunts completely within this model's command range. This unit cannot have more than 20 Swamp Shambler Grunts in play at any time. Okay. And that is it. So, first of all, just make sure we understand this unit. So, this, if you play War Machine, this is very much the Horde's version of Alexia and the Risen. Though a little different, Alexia is objectively stronger than the Boker is, but the Swamp Shamblers are actually stronger than the Risen. So that's something to keep in mind. And really what you're getting is a situation where this is a model that's going to be harvesting models that die around it. And it's friendly or enemy is one thing that you should really notice. And it provides a few things in that regard. One, when I talked about cheap shield guards, it does not get cheaper than this unit. So this unit, you start in play with the Boker and 9 grunts for 11 points. So that means you're getting, if you think about it, you're getting each Swamp Shambler is basically, if you look at it like, is each one of those is 1 point, so that's 9 of your points, and then the Boker is 2, which is really not like how those points would break down. But you can sort of think about it like that. So, each of those Shamblers costs you less than a point. And then additionally, any models that die will, if you can position your Boker accordingly, will also help to refill that unit. And that was sort of very central to the list that Will had constructed with that guy. Morvana has the ability to regrow dead models, so you have your some models die, you refill the Boker's unit, then Morvana brings those models back, and you're sort of like, people have called it Green Machine because you're constantly recycling. And that can be a very strong ability. So that's like the first place that you want to look. He actually is very, very cheap shield guards for the Secret Masters list. He's also a unit that sort of, it does recursion, right? And one of the few things that still just sort of operates in the way it used to. 11 points is not bad. And then really the boon is you still have the Boker, who's fantastic. Again, you kind of need to keep him safe because he's speed 5, def 12, armor 16, 5 wounds and tough. It's certainly not that survivable. And yeah, he can shunt some damage off to the Swamp Shamblers, but you kind of want them for them to make attacks, because they're not, with combined melee, they're not terrible. I mean, you're not going to like drop a heavy or anything like that. But they can do some, they can make attacks. Even Mat 5 POW 8 on its own, sometimes that's enough, and then you can go, up to Mat 7 POW 10, which is not bad, and you can combine from there. However, that rule that I was reading off, where he, so two things that he does specifically. First of all, his stationary spell got buffed to range 7 instead of range, I think it was 3 in Mark II. And that gives him about a 12-inch threat to make something stationary. And he can boost that using, actually I'm going to double check that, but I believe he can boost that using, it says he can remove a friendly grunt model in the unit in formation from play to make an additional melee attack or to boost attack or damage rolls. So it does not specify that it can only boost melee, unlike like Heart Eater, for example, which does specify melee for everything. So you can now he's magic ability 6. You can boost with a grunt in your unit to hit a stationary on a model, and that's an untyped stationary. It is one of the few that doesn't care if you're immune to cold in the game. And that can be a great accuracy boon for anything, obviously. And very few things are going to stop it. You're going to have some kind of like Sacred Word, Spell Word type situation to stop that from happening. So there's some obvious strength there. Furthermore, he's a great like counterattack piece where he's got 2 initials, he can charge, but you're going to get, so his highest POW attack is 12. So if you think you can buy attacks equal to Swamp Shamblers, you can buy attacks, he can buy POW 12s equal to the number of those he has. So if you can hit with a Mat 6 POW 12, he can just keep buying those until the model is dead or until he has no more targets, right? But he also has the ability to boost, which can mean that you actually have, he can do work into harder targets. So at I think he's Mat 6. That's not great, but again, he can boost the hit if he needs to. He's power and strength 12 and 10, but 12 is the key one. And pardon me. And he can be buying and then boosting attacks too. And again, you're getting a number. It's basically each grunt in the unit acts as a fury that he can spend to do something. Now, obviously, that affects his like survivability and stuff. But if you get late in the game and you have a lot of Swamp Shamblers, this is that's great because you can use them as fuel for him. And as I mentioned, they can charge in too. So I mean, ideally, and this is something to keep in mind when playing them, you want to make sure that you put your grunts out on, have them charge stuff, make their attacks. Even if you're like, I'm just making this, I don't really expect much out of it. But have them make their attacks first because they can do that, and then he can make his attacks and then start, popping them out of, for boosts. And you're going to get more effectiveness out of them because if you just sort of like run them and they don't charge, there's they may not do a lot of damage, but any little bit of damage they do helps you, and then you can remove them to get the Boker to do what he needs to do. So that unit's just pretty great overall. We saw early in Mark III, he was played a lot with Wormwood because you could use a few reasons. One, Wormwood was already killing models for souls, so now you got this guy who picks up the corpses, turns the corpses into Swamp Shamblers. Furthermore, they're great targets for Cassius to use. He has Fertilizer on his melee attack, and you could position Shamblers so that you can make a bigger forest wall than just his spells and the table would allow. So that was another use for them, and they were the cheapest way to do that. So a couple uses there in Wormwood. But again, I think there's a lot of different lists. The Morvana 1 list that Will built, I think they fit very strongly in. I think if you just want some really cheap shield guards, they're going to be great for that. If you have something where he's picking up corpses, I think they're going to be solid there. They're certainly not for every list. You also have to paint 21 guys if you're going to play them, so there's that. But definitely a unit to consider, especially like I said, if your goal is the cheapest shield guards you can find, then that's where you should start. Okay, we are powering right along today. I next wanted to talk about the Gremlin Swarm. So everybody's heard about the Grimkin, and so talking about this is twofold because if you play against it, you should know what it does. Circle has decent ways of answering it, but you should be aware that this is how people will be using it. But I recently played it in a Kruger list that was not themed, and you know this is I don't know how often you're going to do this, but let's talk about the Gremlin Swarm. So they're solo, speed 6, defense 13, armor 12, command 1. They are incorporeal, stealth. They're on a medium base. They have 5 wounds that cost 3 points, and their field allowance 2. They play for all minion factions. They're actually partisan for Grimkin. They have annoyance, so living enemy models within an inch of them suffer -1 to attack rolls. They have apparition, which is place the model during control phase anywhere completely within 2 inches of the current location. They are man-sized, so they're considered to be a small base model for rules reasons. They have a rule called Mischief, and that rule says when an enemy warjack or battle engine begins its activation base to base with its model, roll a d3. On a 1, the model suffers -2 speed that activation. On a 2, it suffers -2 to attack rolls, and on a 3, it suffers -2 to damage rolls for that activation. And then it has a star action called Sabotage, which is target enemy warjack or battle engine that is base to base with the model suffers d3 plus 3 damage points and cannot have damage removed from it for 1 round. When damaging a warjack, choose column suffers the damage. Okay, so why would you play a Gremlin Swarm? Why would I use my precious solo slot? Well, for one thing, it's 3 points. So that's key. 2, it's a solo. So there's a lot of focus. There we go. There's a lot of, if you've heard me talk at all about Steamroller 2017, having solos who can contest and control your flags is really, really important. Furthermore, having pieces that can contest zones for a long time or be a nuisance can also be really important. And this one is probably the best for doing that. He has both incorporeal and stealth and no rules that make it become corporeal. The Sabotage that I mentioned does do damage, but it is a star action, not an attack. So it will never become corporeal. So the stealth is incorporeal. So that means you need to target it. Whatever's targeting it needs to be within 5 inches of it, or ignore stealth somehow, and have damage type magical, or be a spell, which also just has damage type magical. And then on top of it, it has 5 wounds, and it's a small, it's considered small base, so it's actually kind of easy to hide. So it's just like, as far as pieces that you can put into a list that will contest and cause your opponent to have just some problems with positioning and scoring, or give you an edge in scoring somewhere that would not be otherwise safely scored by other models. The Gremlin Swarm is a great piece for doing that. Furthermore, though, is the 2 rules I talked about with Warjack. So again, I sort of mentioned that Hutchuck is a good piece to put into a list that plays a lot of Warjacks, but the Gremlin Swarm could also be a very strong piece for that, or for battle engine heavy lists. It can just run up, so it effectively runs 14 inches because of apparition, and it can just run up and base a Warjack or a Colossal or something like that, and when doing so, now it's got to deal with Mischief. So either you have to engineer some weird, wacky way to get the magic damage and stealth on it, or it's a medium base that is sitting in front of something that wants to move through it, causing it to have a speed penalty or an attack rolls penalty or something of that nature. And that in itself can be enough. So, if you can... Circle does a lot of hit and run type work, right? So if you can spend a turn basically being able to make a Warjack completely ineffective, not to mention like a Colossal, something like a Stormwall really doesn't want to be dealing with these gremlins in front of it. That can be really, really huge. Additionally, one thing to note is that that rule Sabotage specifically says cannot have damage removed from them. It is not grievous wounds. So huge bases, Either way, Colossals and Gargantuans are immune to Grievous Wounds. However, this rule does not say Grievous Wounds. Therefore, if you sabotage your opponent's Stonewall or something like that, it's staying damaged. I mean, there's a couple spells to get around that, but that allow you to ignore systems being out, that is. But being able to have a situation where there's a piece that just can't be repaired can be really, really key. It's probably make or break for Imperatus and Retribution, who you want Grievous Wounds on anyways, but you do want an ability like that to stop things like Phoenix Protocol and such. But any Colossal that is backed up by mechanics, they're banking on that staying alive, and if you can start doing damage, and not to mention D3 plus 3 is minimum of 4 damage from a 3-point model on something that big, that it may not be able to deal with back. So mostly it's a nuisance, right? It's very annoying. Incorporeal models are very good for contesting and controlling flags, contesting all zones that you needed to. And then you get the added bonus of you can possibly sort of trade it or put it in a very awkward position for your opponent in front of a war, touching their Warjack. When you're playing them, absolutely make sure you get an idea of who has what spells and magic weapons on the table, as that will be key. But otherwise, it's a very good thing to consider, especially once you're getting down to only having 3 points left. It's going to be a great potential buy. Skip that one. Apologies for the dings. Apparently, my teammates felt the need to talk on Facebook, and I don't think I can mute it and still keep. Maybe. There we go. And then, apologies, team. All right. And then I think we're going pretty quick here. I want to talk about one of the lesser warlocks. So I want to talk about this for a couple reasons. One, this is not the one. I may get to both the ones I really want to talk about, but first, I want to talk about lesser warlocks because they are solos. That means if the rule says you can take a solo in the unit, in the theme, you can take one of the minions, unless it specifies otherwise, you can take a lesser warlock that is in minions. So just real quick, that's Brune and Lug, that's Russian Brine, Wrong-Eye Snapjaw, and Dahlia and Scarif. And then there's 2 of them that I want to talk about, and one for a reason you wouldn't have guessed, and then there's another one that's obvious, and if I have time, I'll hit on that as well. But I want to start with Brune and Lug. So we'll start with Brune. He is speed 5, mat 7, defense 13, armor 15. He's immune to cold. He is Pathfinder. He's command 7. He's on a small base. He has a blunderbuss, which is range 8, rate of fire 1, power 12. Range attack, obviously. And he has a battle axe that is range 1, power and strength 10. He has 8 wounds. He costs 16 points. He's Fury 4. And then he has 2 spells. One is Frost Hammer, which is a 2-cost, spray 8, power 12, cold damage, crit stationary spell. And he has Stonehold, which we'll be coming back to, but it's a 2-cost, range self, upkeep spell. Enemy models roll 1 less die on attack damage rolls against the spellcaster. So, the spellcaster and friendly faction models base to base with it cannot become knocked down. He plays for Signar Khador and Circle and Trollbloods. He also has Flank with Lug, which is if he makes a melee attack against a model in the melee range of Lug, he gets +2 to attack rolls and an additional die of damage. And then he has the lesser warlock rule, and he has limited battle group, which is limited to Lug. And then you get Lug, who is speed 5, mat 7, strength 12. Sorry, skipped around a little bit there. Defense 12, armor 18. He is immune to cold as well. He has Pathfinder, and he is on a large base. He has 2 1-inch melee, POW 16 open fists. He also has, I hate the worm doesn't tell you this in the version I'm in, or the section I'm in, but he has 8, 16, 27 hitboxes. His Animus is Bare Hands, which is 1 cost range self, and when the spellcaster hits an enemy model with a basic melee attack, you can choose to knock down the enemy model or push it 3 inches directly away. Additionally, it lasts for 1 turn. So that's what I want to make sure I was reading. Additionally, he has a handful of rules here. So he has Countercharge, which is when an enemy model advances and ends its move within 6 inches of Lug. In its line of sight, he can immediately charge it. The model can use Countercharge only once per turn and not while engaged. He has a Companion Brune, which is just the rule that says if Brune dies, Lug goes away. He has Hyper Aggressive, so if he suffers damage from an enemy attack anytime except while he's advancing after the attack is resolved, it can immediately make a full advance directly toward the attacking model. And he has Return, which is immediately after resolving a charge attack. This model can make a full advance towards Brune. This model cannot be targeted by free strikes during that movement. And then he also has Chain Attack Grab and Smash, which is if he hits the same model with both initial attacks with the claw weapon, after resolving the attacks, he can immediately make a headbutt or throw against that target. So a lot of really interesting things here that Lug can do. So he can countercharge and return. And most of my discussion here isn't going to go around Lug, but just keep in mind, Lug is actually a really interesting piece. POW 16 is okay. And without being able to bring more minion things to buff, you sort of are going to, he's hitting roughly as hard as Pureblood. Other than the Grab and Smash makes him a little bit more effective in melee. And he's Mat 7, which is pretty big. Power String 16 is okay. The fact that he has Countercharge and Return is really interesting because that means you can charge out and come back. You're always going to kind of be safe. Or you can arrange it to be that way. And then Bare Hands is a really interesting animus. Being able to get a knockdown or a push can give you some scenario play or some setup for some, some more effective, some other things that come along because you've set something up to be easier to attack. It can also arrange for him if you really need. You can throw knockdown models. So if you need to, you could always, if you need to charge something, pay 1 for the charge. Then you pay 1 for Bare Hands. You may boost the hit that one. And then once it hits, you'll automatically get the second one. And then that may, you can get a pretty long potential two-handed throw on something by doing that. So, otherwise Lug is just a pretty solid heavy. For 16 points, he's hitting as hard as a lot of the other things in our faction that are in the 14 to 17 point range, and you're getting Brune. But, obviously there's some fragility with a setup like this. However, the real reason I wanted to talk about it was that there's one interesting thing with Secret Masters in particular, and that is that Brune has Stonehold, which is attacks are 1 less die against him. And that applies when you Shield Guard as well. And he is solo, so he can be a Shield Guard. First, this is true of all minion warlocks. They can Shield Guard and they have transfers. So now you can have Brune sitting within 3 inches of the thing or things that you want to make sure you Shield Guard. He can Shield Guard and he can shunt that damage on to Lug, who has a lot more hit points, and you can heal him up later if you need to. Additionally, he has Stonehold, which means he's armor 15, which is, whatever. But you're rolling 1 less die against him of damage. So that can really take, there's some things that just aren't going to damage him at all. There's some things that will, very minimally damage him, and then he can still transfer it. And that's just kind of a really cool interaction. And then, he has a blunderbuss, he has the potential to have a spray, he's actually pretty hard hitting in melee if you need to charge in there. Lug is pretty hard hitting in melee if you need to charge in there. So you get kind of a nifty little package there that I think there's a lot of potential utility for. Being immune to cold and having Pathfinder is certainly not bad at all either. And I think adding a debuff to their package could be pretty helpful since 16 is pretty good. I think I said that Brune was POW 10 in melee with flank. Yeah, POW 10, range 1. So, you know, buffing that up to like a 12, POW 12 Weapon Master, he can get a charge and potentially 4 additional attacks. So, yeah, it's a pretty effective package, pretty interesting. I'm not going to go too much into too much more detail with him, but I think it's an interesting thing to consider when looking at the options you have for your solo. So that's pretty light. And while we're at it and we're kind of on a roll here, I'm going to talk about, and this will probably be the final entry for tonight, but I'm going to talk about another Lesser Warlock, and that is Wrong Eye and Snapjaw. So the rules first. Wrong Eye is speed 5, mat 6, defense 12, armor 17. He's command 6. He is amphibious, tough, and on a this incorrectly says he's on a 30 millimeter base, but rest assured, Wrong Eye is in fact on a medium base, a 40 millimeter base. He has Fury 4, 8 wounds, cost 17 points. Of course, he's a character. He has 2 melee attacks, a Bite that is a half-inch melee, POW 13, and a Swamp Hook that is 2-inch range, POW strength 12. He has 2 spells. He has Influence, which is a 2-cost range 10. Take control of enemy non-warcaster, non-warlock warrior model. The model immediately makes 1 basic attack, which can be range or melee. And then Influence expires. A model can be affected by Influence only once per turn. And Starcrossed, which is a 3-cost range self control area spell, so 8 inches in his case. While in the spellcaster's control range, enemy models gain an additional die on attack rolls. Discard the highest die of each roll. Lasts for 1 round. He plays for Crix, Circle, Legion, Scorn, and Trollbloods. He can include Minion Gatorman Warbeast in his battle group, so he gets Snapjaw, but you could bring any of the other Gator Beasts, basically. He's a Lesser Warlock, and then his Bite also has Life Drinker, which is if he destroys a living enemy model, he can immediately heal D3 damage points. And then Snapjaw, he's speed 5, strength 12, mat 6, defense 12, armor 18, command 2, he's amphibious and on a large base. He's Fury 4, threshold 8. He has a 1-inch melee power and strength 18 attack, and another 1-inch melee power and strength 15 attack. He has... Sorry, we're doing this live again. It looks like 27 or 28. I can look quick. His Animus is Submerge, which is a cost 1 range self. Spellcaster cannot be targeted by ranged or magic attacks and does not block line of sight, and it lasts for 1 round. And then Snapjaw has Bloodthirst, which is when he charges a living model, he gets an additional plus 2 inches of movement. He's bonded to Wrong Eye, which in addition to the that's part of the companion rule. Suvin's game bonded to Wrong Eye. If he boxes a living model with a melee attack while bonded to Wrong Eye in the control range, the box model is removed from play, and either Snapjaw or Wrong Eye can heal D3. Again, if Wrong Eye dies, Snapjaw goes away. And he has Maneater, which lets him charge living warrior models without being forced. And his tail has Crit Knockdown, which is on a critical hit models knocked down. So, why would you bring Wrong Eye and Snapjaw? And the biggest reason is Starcrossed. Starcrossed is what it does, just to repeat, is it's reverse Hand of Fate. It's reverse Signs of Portents. So enemy models will roll an additional die, and they have to remove the best die. And effectively, the curve gets kind of weird on this, but effectively what it sort of will do is give you a round plus 2 defense on some things. Sometimes it'll be a little better, sometimes a little worse, but the math kind of works out around there. And we already have a bunch of high defense models in our faction, so I would not recommend bringing this with Wolt's better defense 10, 9, etc., because it's not really going to benefit them. The way the curve works, if you need a low roll, dropping a high, you might miss, but it's not that likely. Starting at defense 12, 13, 14, and 15, you're now moving into the range where you're making some pretty significant headway. So, but you only get 8 inches of it, so positioning him is going to be key. However, the other thing is that Snapjaw's Animus is Submerge, and that means you use all the wrong ice stack, he can have Starcrossed up and be untargetable by ranged and magic attacks. And at 12-17, he's and 8 wounds. He's largely safe against most blast damage. And then you just have to make sure you keep him out of melee range. So he can be very effective. He's not what I would bring to use as a shield guard. But you can play Living Beasts and Secret Masters. You can play basically anywhere you can play Living Beasts. I think he could be compelling. There's a lot of points. Both of these last two options are, he's 17, 16 for Brune and Lug. You're putting a lot of points in this basket, but, Snapjaw's a pretty capable heavy on his own. Mat 6, 12, 18 is no big deal, but he can submerge, which means, again, he too is not very targetable. Power Strength 18 is solid. 1-inch melee is solid. He's got some additional charge threat against living models, which is good. His mind is actually very fragile as far as the spirals go. Just one of the, I think that's kind of common to a lot of the Gator Beasts. But yeah, in general, he's capable, and he brings Submerge with him, which is really strong. And then you get Starcrossed, hopefully where you want it. And I think that can be. You may have some lists where that is just something you really want to key on. Instead of worrying about shield guards, you're making Druid models, their defense 13 already. Add in some more buffs, add in Starcross, pretty hard to kill. Things that are high defense, like I said, Scarsfell's Griffins, Warp Wolves, things like that. You're starting to get them into the range of very frustrating for your opponent to try to hit. But he's a very positioning-oriented piece, and right now in 2017, it is harder to break up. So you really want to think about if you're going to be able to play him. I would definitely test him out. I would definitely look at how he's playing, because you need to sort of be able to play him aggressively, but not so aggressively that he dies. But in general, they're just a very strong package, and I feel sort of remiss if I don't go over them. Again, bringing a debuff will really help Snapjaw. Said it right the first time. Snapjaw thrive in melee, and keeping that duo safe. Again, you probably want to set it up so that they're doing work late in the game, like Snapjaw's doing work later in the game, and early in the game, it's making it difficult for your opponent to remove your pieces as the late game gets there. So he's certainly something you should consider. I think he's very strong. I don't necessarily know that I think he's always going to be he's by no means, some people thought he was always going to be the right answer. I don't think that's the case. One interesting thing he can do is you can bring along a Gator friend, and realistically, I think the only one you'd want to bring is a Black-Eyed Wrestler, and that's because it brings Rage. And Rage lets you get a couple heavies up into a damage range without Primal that you otherwise couldn't really do in Circle much of the time. So I just mentioned he's an 18. You could take him to 21 by doing that. However, a Wrestler is, I think, 16 points or 15, I'm forgetting. And this is a 17-point package, so you're putting 32 points into a Lesser Warlock that has to survive. That's risky. I've seen this. I've played a little bit with one that sort of did that, but there's a lot of eggs in that one tiny Gator clutch. You don't want somebody stealing your purse. So, but I think there's certainly something to consider. Secret Masters may enjoy them. There's some pretty high defense in that, but there's some other places that they could possibly be strong if that starts being universal enough in Circle. Thorn Ravagers actually can end up being defense 15 in Forests, and then, add Starcross to that could be pretty nasty. And then even just being defense 13 with that is going to be pretty strong. So, a few things to consider there. It's not just War Beasts that are going to benefit from that if you can position it where you need it. But like I said, a lot of eggs in the basket. So that's wrong with Snapshot. All right, and with that, I think we will. I didn't see any questions float through the chat, which is all right. I think we'll start rolling into the finale here, or the wrap up here. So So those are some of the minion options that you can play. By no means is it exhaustive, and by no means do I think that will be it. We may revisit this type of topic at some point. I didn't really talk about a lot of combat units, as you may notice. That was on purpose, but that might be something we revisit. Pardon me. Also, there's more solos. We know Eilish is coming out, and we'll talk more about him and how he fits in with themes as well. We will also, when we know more, that is. And also, I believe it was announced that Blindwater will be the CID next, as they're scheduled to come out around the 1st of 2018. So we'll be looking, that'll be out, and if any of those things feel like they have a nice home in Circle, and we don't know what that's going to look like or not look like yet, but if they do, we'll take a look at them and we'll maybe discuss why they're a potentially strong piece for Circle. So that's pretty much it on that. Real quick, just a few comments. Sponsors, first of all, Musa Minis. Thanks, guys, for letting me post my videos there to get my little bit more audience. Griffin's Roost Painting. She paints beautiful models still, like I say every week. You can check out griffinsroostpainting.com or go to search for Griffin's Roost Painting on Facebook. Send her a message if you have a project you would like her to work on. Definitely great high-end tabletop or better models. Just one more announcement. I'm still hoping to figure out a method by which I can take my video streams and turn them into an audio stream. I know a lot of what I do is pretty much audio anyways. At least for now, I am trying. There's some pieces in play to hopefully do some more tabletop tactics stuff at some point. But the house and the gaming area of the house is taking a little bit longer to come together than I would like. So it may be a little bit on that. The audio, that's just, I need enough time to sort of work it out. So hopefully soon, but no timeline yet. And then just to reiterate something I talked about at the beginning of the episode, in case you didn't tune in right away, next week I'll be airing at a special time at 5 p.m. Central, or 3 p.m. If you're out on the West Coast. And because we will have our first guest on the show, and that guest is none other than Mr. Will Pagani. I don't know if you've heard, he's kind of a big deal. He's a pretty good War Machine player, and he works for Private Ship Press. No big deal. We'll talk probably about where Circle is, Circle CID that just happened, Theme Forces, and so forth. So be sure to tune into that. If you subscribe to the channel, that'll make it easier for you to know when I go live to talk about that. And of course, the video on demand will the video afterwards will be available. And I don't know that I'll have audio worked out by then, but if I do, or when I do, I will definitely make sure that is an episode that I get up on audio. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you next time.